Hello there and welcome to How to Play. I'm Diggles.
And I am Erik.
Today we're going to be talking about how to play, some things that happened to us during some, I would say, a far distant past Magic the Gathering tournament. It was competitive EDH, and we're going to talk about what happened to us, how we were in different situations, and I think it's going to be pretty cool because one of them is going to be how to play, like this social situation that happened, and the other was going to be how to play game mechanics and how that affected that tournament for each of us. So what we're going to be talking about is Silicon Dynasty 2, not 1. Right. This was a fun tournament. I was able to take Ob Nixilis, my Thunder Thighs list. I would say I have that list edited and changed. I'm still playing Ob Nixilis, even though the bans really hurt, I think, any kind of tournament play that I'm going to see with this guy in the future. But he's still really fun and can be competitive. So I still have that deck built, and it just attacks those opponents on a really cool angle. But I'll jump right into my story. So the first round, I sat down, I was paired with, we're going to call him, names have changed to protect the innocent, okay? So we're going to call him Muscle Mike. And one aspect of this, when you go to like a larger tournament, right, you're going to bump into people that have maybe Magic the Gathering clout. Maybe they have a channel, maybe they do gameplay videos, maybe they have a podcast, and they're going to bring their reputation, and you're going to recognize them because you're going to see them, right? Muscle Mike was one of these people that had some presence online, and he before the game even started, I have to say, Muscle Mike was late, and we literally had to call a judge that we were ready to start our game, but we couldn't start our game. So that was kind of the first foul, that whatever happened to him that day before, starting round one on the first day, he was late. So we had to call a judge. So the judge is already kind of aware of our table. He arrives before time and we get started. And while he's like shuffling, we're about ready to play, he hands each of us like a coupon, and on it, it is written his like channel. And he has this kind of phrasing that he does with it. If you visit this website, you'll get 5% off. And I can't remember if it was for card sleeves or if it was for singles or something like that. But already, so we got this guy that's late. Most of us at the table recognize him. And then he hands us basically a business card to be like, I'm a big deal. So this is offset kind of this social dynamic where it's just like, oh, I'm famous. So you might have found me online. If you don't know, be knowing, right? And then we're sitting down to play a game of Commander at this tournament, and this is TEDH. Erik, should we talk a little bit about the difference, slightly, of like TEDH to CEDH?
I think it's worth going into. I think that the difference between TEDH and CEDH is probably, at least in my experience, bigger than the difference between CEDH and CEDH, as in casual EDH. And a lot of the dynamics we're experiencing are things that would not fly in a standard CEDH game, would not fly in a casual EDH game. But when you add in the additional incentives around being at a tournament, all of a sudden you start seeing these sorts of behaviors.
And I guess the biggest difference, right? A CEDH game is just sleeving up competitive level cards, playing a competitive level game. And TEDH is like, you make a mistake, I'm going to call a judge, and there's no judges at a CEDH game, but at TEDH, usually it could be sanctioned, but they're judges, and there's like a big prize some of the times. So it's a serious situation.
And there's considerations. This will come up a bit in my story, but there's considerations outside just the game you're playing. Right? You have your record for the game. You have other people with records, and you have your overall standing in the tournament. All of which are things that are external to the specific game you're playing that might not impact a standard CEDH game outside of a tournament setting.
So back to my story about Muscle Mike. So there was already kind of one strike, and then he's handing out business cards. So he's, in my mind, kind of creating this social dynamic, like I was saying. And I'm big news. I carry this weight outside of this game, and I'm giving you something, right? I'm giving you a coupon, like a 5% off or whatever. And I have to say, I know, and everybody should be knowing, like those people that have those coupons, they get a bump. They get something for that. So it's not necessarily kindness, it's potentially just kind of continuing the machine that we're all doing online as content creators. So there's that. So that one thing, he was late giving me a business card, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go into the game. So not too far into the game, but far enough that we're like kind of playing. There was another interaction where there was a trigger that was missed. And honestly, like you can miss like beneficial triggers for yourself. You can't miss triggers that are gonna affect you. But in TEDH, some of that stuff is gray area. If you make the call, you can kind of make those triggers known and stuff like that. And so this wasn't any this was maybe like a third case. So I think, as I remember, I think it was a Mystic Remora. So Mystic Remora has this cumulative upkeep that you have to pay at a certain time. And if you don't pay at a certain time, things happen to it. It gets sacrificed. Okay. So untap, upkeep, doesn't pay for Mystic Remora, draws a card, starts to take his turn, and then I'm like, in a serious way, I'm not really doing anything until something else happens. In TDH, like I'm gonna say like there's a lot of things that can happen, and I think in this situation, I think I waited until like that active player, which was him, tried to take an action, and then I was gonna remind him like your Mr. Kimura is in your graveyard or something, right? You didn't pay, you drew a card, and he says to us like, "Oh, I didn't pay. Is it okay that we go back?" And I said no. And then it was kind of a discussion like, okay, come on guys, I could have gone back, and I'm like, you have new information. And then a second player that we were in the pod with voiced up to like, no, you didn't pay. And so, and I think the fourth player like didn't really have an opinion, might have been his first tournament. In any case, so we have to call a judge again. And so it was just this weird kind of emotional imbalance where you're not going to let the celebrity or the guy go back on something at this tournament level where there's potentially hundreds or thousands of dollars available in prize. That like, I'm going to go back on something that's completely beneficial to me. I know I missed it, but can we go back? And no, I didn't let that happen. We called a judge. And that's, I guess, that's the tie off the story is like when we have these kind of social situations happen, we're bringing in other things that are going to affect the game. And that honestly is like having a gemstone caverns in your pocket, and you get an advantage before the game even happens to like have this social situation. And I would say like with the essence of what we're doing with our conversations on this podcast, on this channel, that is a certain how to play, but you're bringing in an aspect outside the game to benefit you.
And I think that it's interesting, the interplay of sort of the social aspect of the game, starting out with trying to get big timed and then going from there to, let me take advantage of this social contract to gain some extra information, right? In a lot of situations, how I want to spend my mana is impacted by the card I draw for my turn. I would think most players would evaluate how they want to spend their mana differently when they've gained new information about their cards. And, going back to paying for our Mystic Remora after we've learned that is just obviously a huge advantage. And I wonder how much we have this sort of first round, seeing what we can get away with versus the expectation, right? Is this something that this player tries to do regularly? Is this something that is a habit from CEDH that's a bad habit the players build because there's not frequently, as you said, there's not judges at a regular CEDH pod? Is this a bad habit that's been reinforced and then brought over, or are we trying to gain an advantage? And I think that when you have any sort of gray area like that, you've gotta be on the side of standing up for yourself, especially in this situation where you've got a internet micro celebrity
Yeah, right.
We all know sometimes when you're in a game with someone like that, they can ask for a little bit more than is strictly allowed in the rules, and sometimes come with the expectation that they're going to get told yes. And it's critical to protect your ability to compete fairly in the game.
Right. And I think there's a couple things that came to mind that you mentioned because he had a stack of these things. It wasn't like for the first pod for the first people I see. It was a stack of these coupons. So it's just like, this is just going to continue this kind of social connection of like, I'm a nice guy, I'm giving you something. We have like a social contract that like I gave you something that's going to make your life easier. You owe me. Right. Whether or not he's a bad actor, even if he followed all of the rules, he's still doing that. He's still creating a social situation where I'm a great guy, right? I gave you a coupon, right? And so that in itself, and then two, like in the first round, like you mentioned, there's a lot of I think apprehension for going to many tournaments over my lifetime of playing Magic the Gathering. There's kind of a cognitive dissonance. I don't want to call a judge on this first round, or I don't want to call a judge on this thing. And that, I have to say, in how to play, that's wrong. When you think you need to call a judge, raise your hand. Figure it out with the judge if you should have called them. They are there walking around on the grounds or whatever, organizing the play of that tournament, that it's above board. And the things that I don't do a judge call for will create an imbalance, right, in later games. It will affect the entire tournament, in my opinion, if I don't call a judge. So those are a couple of things that I thought about that we could encourage to do. And I still do. I do. I did this at a sealed tournament recently where I just called just because we were both agreeing that we were gonna, we missed a trigger that was mandatory, and I just needed to make it known. So I'm that guy.
Yeah, and just because in tournament DDH there's a judge to call, and maybe it's appropriate there, doesn't necessarily mean, if we translate it back to playing games on the regular at the LGS, that you should let those slide there because you wouldn't at a tournament, right? There are certain kinds of advantages like that where if you're setting the precedent that we need to always let people go back and change what they did for a certain kind of player, you'll go to the LGS, they're playing with a pre-con. That's fine. Let's explain the rules and let's let it slide. With other kinds of players, if you set a precedent that you're going to let it happen, it's going to keep happening.
Mm-hmm.
This is in situations where you're playing casual games. That doesn't mean just because the game is casual that you need to accept that those games are going to be inherently unfair. You don't need to play into the arms race of they're going back and paying for their Mystic Grimoire trigger. I'm going to go back and pay for my Mystic Grimoire trigger. And then everyone is slowly doing that more and more until we've got a game that's not really playing by any consistent rule set in terms of what actions matter, what actions don't matter. And if you set that precedent in your casual games and are building those habits, or letting the players at your LGS build those habits, that's the game you're going to end up with every time.
Right. And I like the aspects of games that I play at my local game store where some of the time I'll bring a deck that I am like really new to and I didn't see this interaction. This happened a couple of weeks ago. It's just like I actually am going to do some actions and I don't know if I win the game, but we're going to figure it out together. And that in like a mid-power game, like that's a fun interaction. I hope it's fun for my opponents. I know it's a fun for me, but like, oh, what does this card do? Okay, I drew this card. Does this work? I honestly, I've never had somebody have a really negative reaction at an LGS from like us figuring out what our cards do, or interactions that happen. But yeah, you're right. You can have a slippery slope when you're like, oh, I didn't pay for this. Is this okay? I didn't do this on my turn. I didn't move my lightning greaves. That's like always the one that I'm like, is this gonna make me lose the game? Or is it just like really a big advantage if that lightning greaves, if those shoes are just on the floor? So anyway, I'll say in closing my story, I went on in that tournament to get to top 8, and then I completely punted. Talk about that another time. And I didn't see this opponent later in day 2. Something, yeah, I guess continue to happen if you get violations in a TDH game. Like we were playing at a tournament, you're not going to be able to make multiple mistakes that are judge calls, because there's going to be rules beyond that. So in any case, but yeah, that was one of my how to plays emotional contract. Because we want to kind of seal it up with that. But did you have any closing thoughts, or we want to jump into your story?
I think luckily we haven't seen this person handing out any coupons at any recent events.
No.
You know, they eventually, when there's a pattern of being a bad actor, the community can usually find a way to make sure that you don't get to be a bad actor for much longer. And I've got a similar story, also in round 1, although this was more about things going on within the game rather than things going on outside the game. I was playing Rograk Silas at Silicon Dynasty, and we sat down for our first round, and at the table was an Atraxa, the 7 mana, look at the top 10 cards of your library, put one of each card type into your hand, Atraxa. We had a Kinnan, and we had a 4th player that I might not be able to remember. It was either Timna Krom or Timna Thrasios, but I don't entirely remember. There was a lot of blue farm at the tournament, and there was also a good amount of Thrasios going around, as there always is, because those are good decks. And we sat down. The Kinnan player had a pretty good start. They played an early Seedborn Muse off of a bunch of rocks, and then quickly found their Ancient Tomb. And then they had some effect that was generating treasures. I can't remember exactly what. And as they're generating the treasures, they were sort of stacking them up on top of each other. So it was a little difficult to tell exactly how many they had. And they weren't being super clear with what was going on with their mana. And I'm counting how they're paying for their spells, maybe a little bit more than other people at the table were. The Atraxa player I know told me that this was the first, not just CEDH tournament, but first tournament he had been to at all.
Oh, awesome.
So I actually spoke to him a bunch throughout the tournament. He was a really nice guy, and we had some interesting conversations about what to do in various situations, both in terms of plays and just in terms of rules, because of what came up, which is the Kinnan player made a play. I believe it was a Kinnan activation when I was pretty sure he was on 6 mana. And going back and counting the mana, we had them count out how they were paying. They were tapping their Ancient Tomb for 3. Which is 1 more mana than it should produce, but they were treating it as if it were affected by Kinnan's ability to make non-land permanents that tap for mana, tap for an additional mana.
Now, and this wasn't a guy that was confused about how good Kinnan is or something like that. You had a feeling that this was a experienced Kinnan player?
They were definitely an experienced Kinnan player, and they were tapping their other lands for the appropriate amount of mana.
Mm-hmm.
So there could have been some amount of confusion or what have you. But because this was early in the tournament, we didn't immediately call a judge, and I didn't have any conclusive. I wasn't entirely sure about how mana had been tapped for previous activations. There was this unclear stack of treasures, and it's a little difficult to go back and say, well, how many treasures did you have this turn? How many treasures did you have this turn? So our resolution was, we asked this player to stack their treasures so it was a little bit more clear how many there were, or to put a die on them indicating how many there were, so that we could more easily tell. And that seemed to be agreeable to everyone, and we continued on with the game. After this, the Kinnan player passed to me, and I played Heuristic Study, which is an interesting card for social interactions, because in terms of cards where people need to frequently go back and ask about things that happened in the past, it and Mystic Remora are number one and number two.
Yeah, right.
And so we went back around to the Kinnan player's turn, and the Kinnan player cast a spell. I asked if they were paying for Rhystic Study. They said no, and so I drew a card. And they said, wait, yes, I do want to pay, after I'd already drawn the card. And immediately they put their hand up and they call a judge.
Interesting. And this was after the fact that can you put your treasures out, please? You didn't pay for this properly, et cetera, et cetera. Like maybe they're remembering that I messed up, and then this is the same game, and this is like what happened after that. So maybe a little bit of like a vindictive attitude, or
Yeah. But, this was, well, first of all, it's probably right to call a judge when you have these sorts of disagreements or any sort of disagreement. I don't want to discourage people from calling judges.
Right.
Absolutely. But it highlighted for me that maybe that's what I should have been doing in the previous turns when it was unclear where mana was coming from to activate abilities. He called a judge, and we sorted out the draw versus he said no, he said yes, we were changing our minds resolution of the Rhystic Study. And we could have done the same thing about the mana situation, but unfortunately we didn't. So that game continued on. Eventually the Kinnan player ended up winning in a reasonably close game. And after the game, we were sort of at the tournament with a group of players, and I got together with some of the other players and pointed out the Kinnan player that I'd been playing with and said, hey, pretty sure he's been tapping his Ancient Tomb for 3 mana, and we had him counted out once, and he had been doing that. So if you end up with this player in any,
I think his name was Timmy Toombs. No,
oh yeah, Timmy Toombs. If you end up with Timmy Toombs in any of your games, keep an eye out. And in, I believe, round 5, 2 of the group we were there with ended up in a game with Timmy Toombs, and because they had been warned about this behavior, they caught him doing it a couple more times. And I think that there's some interesting because as we brought up with your story, when we set a precedent that you can get away with things, you're gonna keep trying it. Obviously, the correct thing to do would have been calling a judge, bringing attention to it so that they were aware. But because we're communicating what's going on, at least with someone in the tournament, it can be looked for, and we can preserve that fair gameplay at least somehow.
right. Well, and I'm going to say I'm in the school of I'm probably leaning towards what you did. Like, oh, you're paying for this activation. Can I check your mana? And then like I address in a respectful way, like I can't tell how much mana you have. Like this is a resource management game. Like I need to know how many resources that you have, because I need to interact with you, and I'm trying to win as well. So like, can you do it this way? And I guess if not, maybe that's an escalation. But yeah, if I was faced with that, even at that TDH level, Eric, I don't think I would have done it. Like I don't think I would have called a judge after we figured it out and be like, oh, you silly goose, you got too much mana out of this Ancient Tomb, you can't do that. And then I'd watch him like a hawk, if it's going to happen again. And then once we've kind of adjusted and the whole table is aware, even to the guy that's new, this is something I think I would have done the exactly same thing that you did. I wouldn't have lost though. I just to say that.
I probably shouldn't have lost that game. It was one of 2 rounds that I punted pretty badly, the other being unfortunately top 16.
Yeah, yeah. The aspect of calling a judge, do it when you're confused about calling a judge. They're there to kind of service the tournament. They're there to keep all of these players playing successfully and everything go smoothly. And I've seen it too. A judge comes over, answers a question, sees something on the game board, that needs to be addressed, and then we have like more consistent fun and I guess legal fun with playing a tournament. So I would say don't really hesitate. And then talk to judges after. There were a lot of long conversations, and I was, we won't go into it today, but it's just like there were a lot of judge calls and just tip of the hat to the judges at Silicon Dynasty 2. I was like, I don't follow them anymore, or like, we don't talk anymore, but I was able to get those judges' names and like really, show respect to them, because it's a lot. It's a long day for judges on those tournament days.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a long day for players as well when you've got rounds going long, and a bunch of different things to pay attention to. How much mana are my opponents tapping their Ancient Tombs for? Am I getting distracted by this coupon code to make sure that my opponents are not missing any of their triggers? There's just a lot to pay attention to.
Right. And I'd say, Eric, that about does it for today for How to Play. We talked today about those kind of social contracts on like, that's how you can play. You can kind of create a situation outside the game, or an emotional game that you're playing against your opponents. And then How to Play, you can have these situations where you tap your Ancient Tomb for like way too much mana, have these illegal plays, and then honestly get found out that this is happening over the course of the whole tournament, and this is where you can kind of find an inroad to your victory through the inability for your opponents to track. And I'll just say it's a form of cheating. So these are things we're going to be talking about more. Any closing thoughts, Erik?
No, I think I've never thought anything in my entire life other than you know what? Never mind.
All right. If you want to find us online, you can email us at howtoplaysquared@gmail.com. We're going to keep talking about how to play and how to play in future episodes. Check us out. It's great seeing you, Erik.
Great chatting with you as well, Diggles. Look forward to discussing more CEDH happenings, TEDH happenings, and casual happenings around the LGS.
All right. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.